Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Second and final panel will be facilitated by Catherine Graham, who's going to introduce you. Can I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to use your focusing voice rather than your cans voice? Thank you.
Okay, lovely. So welcome back. This is, I think, having had such a wonderful rooting around in the processes of what we do, how we do it, how we speak. This is kind of this more zoomed out kind of topic. Thinking about, is it art? Is what we do art? What is art if it's not what we do? What bit of it might be all these kind of questions. So we have a wonderful panel of lighting designers who are all in the book and say very interesting things. And I'm sort of a designer and a researcher. So I might ask everyone to introduce themselves really quickly, and then I might throw some provocations at you about, gently of course, about this question of art.
In my focusing voice, Paul Pyatt, freelance lighting designer.
Carter, freelance lighting designer.
Joanna Town, light designer.
Peter Mumford, lighting designer.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, I think this question of is lighting design art is threaded through this book in loads of really interesting ways, and there are loads of interesting questions that kind of spider out from this idea of is lighting design art. There's the classic, which was kind of hinted at, I think, in the last question, of this sort of art versus craft question that I think isn't a binary, just to sort of lay it out already, spoiler alert. But there's also a question of kind of authorship, of collaboration, of where the artwork might be. And I think a starting point maybe to jump off is this idea that what art is such a broad field. And Wittgenstein, about whom Kelly will know much more than I do, he talks about defining art in the way that you define games. So that of all the things that exist that are games, there is no trait universal to all of them. That there are competitive games, non-competitive games, solo games, team games, multiple. You can't quite define games by what they are, but there is something that a game that all games are that we can't quite define. And that he uses in a lot of philosophers as a way of thinking about art. That there's so much art that doesn't quite look like all the other art, it doesn't feel like all the other art, but does something art-ish. And I think that is a way that admits lighting design, both lighting design within a theatrical or a dance or a musical context, lighting design as a part of another artistic whole, and also lighting design, as I'm sure you'll talk to us about in a few, where as an installation in itself. So I think there's quite a broad spectrum of practice that we can think about. So I think that there are other things we'll touch on, but I want to start there. Where do we stand on whether lighting design is art? Are there types of lighting design that is art, types that aren't? Are there types of lighting design that is bad art? Very quick responses from our panel. Again, we'll start with you, Paul.
I'm not sure if it's art or craft, actually. There is an art to it, as it were. But I think that's so difficult. One's response to any project you do has to be holistic, I suppose. And the art of putting that together with the thoughts of the director and designer and whoever else is involved is, yes, I suppose it could be described as art.
Excellent. I think we will. It feels already like we're going to be coming back to this art craft question. Please.
I think during my career, over the length of my career, I've come to want to explore it as art. I think it definitely is art. I mean, if I was to give a yes/no answer, yes, it is art, because it's in an art form and it's part of that art form, and it's creative. That's my short answer.
Well, for me, it definitely is art. I think we are craftsmen at it, and how we we all craft very differently. But I always saw myself as an artist that couldn't hold a pen, and therefore I found lighting design as a way of expressing what I really wanted to put on canvas. So therefore, from the very beginning, that's how I always saw lighting design. Whether it's what type of art that is, can be seen by other people in different eyes, good or bad. But to me, it's me putting what I always wanted to put on the canvas.
I think it's quite a general question. The kind of, but is it art? And it gets applied to lots of things. It gets applied to things in galleries. You know, you look at Rauschenberg's vat of boiling mud, and people will look at that and say, but is it art? And my understanding of art, or the definition that I like best, is that art is a decision-making process. If you decide to do something, you decide to do something creatively, then it becomes art. And I don't believe that lighting design is a service industry. I believe it's something that the designer or the artist decides to do and makes a creative contribution in that sense. So I've never had any doubt about the fact that certainly what I'm dealing with is an art form.
And I wonder, Peter, if I could pick up on this kind of differences between the kinds of forms of art, because I know that you have a background in fine art and also kind of stage design and lighting design, and how those, how they might be different or not different in terms of how you might approach.
Different to what?
So between kind of fine art and say lighting design.
Well, I mean, what do we mean by fine art? We mean, normally, when we talk about fine art, we're talking about painting and sculpture. And for some reason it gets called fine art. I would simply regard it all as being art. I mean, we now see a lot of lighting work entering into galleries in terms of installations. We see fine artists working with light because they recognise that it's a creative medium that can be used in the same way they use paint, and the same way they use steel and structural things. So there's been a kind of crossover in that sense. But I don't think that negates the work that we do in the context of collaboration, that's already been talked about quite a lot before. I think there's still, one has one's individual work, and you're part of a collective piece of work as well, which allows one to penetrate that work in different ways, sometimes more obviously, but always there. Does that answer it?
I think art considers shape. I mean, you look at shape, form, colour, construction, and people do that in different ways. You're either a painter and you're still looking at all those elements, or a sculptor, how a mug sitting in the middle of a floor captures the light. People say that that's art. And we're doing exactly the same. We're looking at the shape we're making within this stage space. We're looking at the form. For me, colour is the main element, and that's all part of that palette, of artistic palette.
Benny and I were having a little conversation about this earlier, talking about some kinds of definitions of art. I was talking about Clive Bell in the early 20th century gave a definition of art as just significant form. The form of an artwork, or the forms within an artwork, become significant if they trigger an emotional response or an affective or communicative response through the forms that they have. And I think, as you're so right in saying, that's so much of what we're doing, both kind of in sort of visual terms, physical terms, and also the temporal terms, well, kind of from as you're kind of moving from one moment to the next, how you kind of fold and then move on. And I suppose on that, I wanted to come to you, Lucy, about how you're sort of moving between theatrical and dance collaborations and sort of independent art installations or light art installations, and how that has been for you.
Yeah, no, I just, I don't think it's any different in a way. It's about the way you label it. But am I a lighting designer, or because I'm starting to have an interest in light in its own right as an installation without physical performance, should I therefore call myself a light artist? And I think it's just about the way you market yourself. You know, it's been suggested to me that maybe I call myself something different in order to get a public installation commission. You know, so it's just about that really. And I guess I'm at this point, and I think a lot of people a lot of lighting designers have kind of done installation work, and I'm not unique. I just feel that I've got to this point after 25 years of being a lighting designer where I want to explore light for its own sake. And Peter just spoke about we're not a service industry, and I feel slightly that I have become part of a service industry in the theatre that I do. Not all the time, but sometimes that's tiring and boring, being told what to do or being forced to do something that is a compromise to I think is a big part of what we do, is learning to compromise and not feel like it's a compromise. But yeah, so just allowing myself, I think over those 25 years I've realised I am an artist, and now I'm interested in looking at light for entirely its own sake, and how that might be able to tell its own story or tell us something about life without any other supporting element. But whether it's art, whether it's still lighting design, I don't know.
Well, I think that there's or light as a material can do things that other, I think you were saying that you could do something with steel, you could do something with paint, you can do things with light that you can't do with other media. And the sort of possibilities that are there to make a sort of piece of art that borrows in a way from a theatrical language. We were talking a little bit earlier to Ratton about how a lot of light art doesn't go far enough into the medium itself, whereas coming from a background of theatre and performance to kind of be able to go further into making light not just look or feel amazing, but to kind of go somewhere further as a communicative, expressive pen, which I think by anyone's book has to be art, right?
I think it's very much within, I call it growth actually, the growth of contemporary dance world, which you can sort of in this country track back to the late 60s really, which is when people like Martha Granford over here, and when that began, that lighting designers who were working in that medium with dancers were able to take on much more of a scenic role, much more of a structural role, much more of a space-defining role. And I think that's been a huge influence in that route that allows people to then, like Lucy's saying, want to step outside of it every now and then. But I also think that it's defined lighting design in a way that allows you to then bring those things into other areas. It is true that within a kind of abstract dance piece that's working, where you're dealing with a narrative which is buried in movement rather than expressed in words, there is an opportunity to use light in if you like, a freer way. I don't know if Michael would agree with that, but that's certainly what I would feel. It's allowed it to develop, but I've also found that one can then take so much that one's created in that area and bring it into the world of opera, bring it into the world of plays and use it. And I think that's created an independence and a recognition for lighting design as a collaborative member of the collective team. And that's something which has evolved over the last 40 years actually, it seems. And I think that's the kind of changes that we're seeing is how it's become defined, the fact that we're sitting in a room full of people who design and create lighting within various contexts, within the context of concert work, within the context of perhaps architectural work in some areas, and within galleries and within theatre. And it's kind of grown out of that, and it's grown with the technology as well, which has enabled that and made the vocabulary so much broader, so much able to use. So I think you've got to see it in lots of different areas and try not to get too pocketed in those areas. But Lucy's right, if you go and do something in a gallery, you become a fine artist. You know, you do an installation, you're an artist. You do the same thing in the theatre the following week, and you're a lighting designer. But that's just people's terms of reference. That just enables people to understand what they're looking at. And it's also true that people now, I'm talking about audiences, the punters, do recognise what they're looking at much more than they ever used to.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time for these kinds of conversations, because I think, as you said in the introduction to this, that there are still some crazy opinions about what light is or isn't, or the potential gaps that might be there. But also there is this kind of groundswell of an understanding, of which this book is important, and the kind of the work that all of the lighting designers in the room do, I think is helpful. And then to kind of think of the building a recognition of what light really is doing, really is capable of, is picked up, I think, across the field. And I think, to come back to the point that you raised, Paul, about this, that it being an art that involves craft, I think is really an interesting question to tease out, because I think the sub of the question, is it art, is what the alternative is it a sort of technical craft? And it, in a way, is a technical craft. I'm not sure that, I don't know how people feel about this, but it doesn't seem to me that it's a binary opposition. It feels that all art, to a degree, involves craft, and that there's been.
I did an installation in Switzerland a couple of years ago in a castle, in a contemporary music and art festival, and there was she was in one of the guilds in Switzerland doing something. I think she was a wood crafter, and she helped us install it, and I didn't install the physical elements, and I didn't cable them up, and I didn't program the lighting desk, but verbally I kind of created my installation with my team. And afterwards she asked me if I thought, if what I'd done was I an artist? Was it craft that I'd done? Because to her, she was making art with her hands, or crafting art with her hands, but she was questioning whether I saw myself as an artist. I don't have the answer to that. I don't think that just because I didn't do the manual work, but is that part of craft? Do you have to actually physically craft it with your hand?
No, because it's a decision-making process.
Yeah.
The art is about the decision, not about. It's not even about handling the paint sometimes.
Sort of thought about what you're being asked to do. So what Michael's approach is that they start from day one in a black space to which light is introduced, to which Mr. Malifant then choreographs something. So he's creating something from the absolute genesis of nothing. Whereas my stock in trade is usually to enhance what has been designed already. And there is a craft, whereas there is an art to that, I suppose, depending on what you're doing. But so it's a different application, I would say, to that degree. Rather than me being the genesis of the, well, sometimes you are given just an empty space in which to light, and that can be very powerful. But it's just a slightly different thing, because you're not starting from an empty black space.
But don't you regard the canvas, if we're talking about the set, as your canvas?
I suppose so. I haven't really thought about it.
Because you still start from darkness.
Because it's still, I suppose you do.
You can't
There's
see it.
something
You
in
put
it
something
as well,
on it.
which you have to point at, or you have to communicate something with an actor. But I think that's a fundamentally different approach, though, to
You're layering that,
what you're doing. Yes, I suppose.
that set, aren't you? And
I should call myself an artist.
forming the light around the characters, the actors on stage, where You could just switch everything on, and that would be
Yeah, but
all I know how the
As
craft
Mike also
of
touched
this
on, there is the
works.
side where either you're a technical lighting designer or an artistic lighting designer. I have absolutely no interest at all in how it works. I mean, that's somebody else's job, in my opinion. I like to know how it. It's sometimes difficult to know what you can get out of a new lighting board, a new fixture, a new thing. But I have no interest at all how it works. But if I can use it as an instrument, then it can be useful to me. But so I suppose you are looking at the art side of light rather than the technicality side. There are so many logistics in lighting design. You have to have so many things. As we spoke in the first one about how you're interdependent with so many other people in order to make that work. That's the important thing.
But if you look at a sculptor, you'll find that the sculptor is totally reliant on the person who's going to cast it, the person who's going to do all sorts of things to it, and very often will only do a certain amount of actual hands on them. So it's much more about, it's about the concept, isn't it? I think. I mean, there are painters who simply send their assistants up. There's one example of it up when I was working in a gallery up north somewhere, to paint a series of dots on the wall, and they didn't even come, which I actually thought was a bit outrageous. But you know, I mean, it's to do with the idea that makes a difference. That's why I say we shouldn't be regarding it as a service industry. I mean, if you find yourself in a situation where a director is telling you what to do, I don't want to go there again. Which doesn't mean you're not going to collaborate with that person. It doesn't mean I don't respect his opinion, and that can't be shared. But if you're just simply facilitating somebody else's idea, then it does become craft. But I don't think that's what we're about.
You're right, so it's different sets could pose different problems, and you may approach them in a different way, but you're still putting that extra layer on whatever you've been given, and I think it's that extra visual layer makes all the difference.
And you can surprise your co-designers too, in a good way.
Yeah,
It's not always, I don't like that. Sometimes it's, I hadn't seen it like this, but that's great. I mean, that also is a part of it, which means you're putting another layer on the cake, which I think is good.
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting thing here in terms of thinking of light as an art material, and as you so rightly say, not all art involves that direct contact. There is an assumption that art is somehow about kind of getting your hands dirty, getting a potter with the clay or a painter with that, and we do have, as we had in the previous panel, we do have this other whole kind of intermediary layer in a way of that the light is what we're doing, or I kind of think that the light that's coming out of the instruments is what we're doing. We've also got kind of the instruments and the cabling and that whole kind of electrical team, programming team, all of that kind of, not in between, because that's part of what's happening. And there's an interesting thing that it's a quite a unique sort of art material in that way, because there's a sort of, I suppose it's similar maybe with sound or with music, that the ephemeral thing comes out from other quite concrete steps along the way, that are creative certainly, but are technical and are craft based, and it's sort of through those that we get at kind of the art itself.
I mean, it's like a musician with their instrument, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paul just called it an instrument, the lighting rig, and it's true. It's just like that. We don't have to. A musician doesn't necessarily know how to make their instrument, but they still create an art when they play it.
I think it's not unlike making a movie in a sense, where that requires a huge number of collaborators all working creatively at different levels, but it's still probably going to be the director's concept of it, but they won't be shooting the film, they won't be editing it, probably won't be working with all of those people. So there's a lot of comparisons there. It's like the whole thing. I mean, I always like a programmer working with a programmer as being like working with an editor. It's a very similar relationship, actually. And I think there are all those layers to it, which makes it complex. and which I guess makes these questions get asked. But I would stand by what
I think it leads in a way to, Joe, you say in the book that you try, when you're making a show, to have something from your soul in each of the things. And I think it's a lovely way to think about light and art and performance making. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Oh my God, to speak, it just comes from here. Yeah, I have to, I feel I want ownership of every design I do, and that ownership has to come from it having a meaning of being, to be there, and why I'm sitting in a theatre for those many hours. There has to be some absolute internal passion to want to be there, I think. Working with all those people and collaborating with those people, sometimes good and bad. So, it's hard to it's really hard to put into words, but if I walk away feeling that I have left a little bit behind, I don't feel like I've done a good job. Sometimes I don't
What is
done
it?
a good job. That's not really the right word. It's not finished. And also I think part of that description is also, I do believe that we don't ever actually finish, because you can constantly be reshaping what we do to constantly make it a fine art. And I think that we never quite reach that point. What I would say is, people would say, is the Mona Lisa, because we don't actually have that time. And what would be lovely would be to explore a show for, not all the time, but maybe over a really long process. But then, because theatre is theatre, it's never going to be still like a Mona
It's
Lisa.
ephemeral.
Yeah, so, you know, I don't think I've answered the question.
No, I think you have.
Catherine, could I ask you, what did you mean? Can you define a little more about what you meant by leaving something behind? That's fascinating.
I think,
What is it?
to me, it's, you give it, it's,
Is it?
Well, you leave your work behind.
Yeah.
you do, yeah, you
You know, it's not just anything. It's, I think I know exactly.
When I was a chief electrician, if we did a really good job and the show looked great and it was all fantastic, I knew that I'd done that show to the best of my team's ability. That was lovely. Thank you very much. Go home. I think I there's a little bit more there that I leave behind when I do a design that I didn't when I was a chief electrician.
Is
And
that
yet
the
I
result
think
of the creativity?
Yeah.
But I think what's
Passion.
also, sorry.
I just think it's passion, I don't know. Sorry.
As you say, there's a sort of more of an emotional involvement that you don't necessarily have when you were a chief electrician, where your job is essentially to put the nuts and bolts together and make electrons flow in the right way. That
Do it
the
to the
ring
best of your ability.
yeah. Whereas
Yeah.
you've got someone more emotionally involved.
And is it to do with risk as well?
Risk, failure, pushing the
Yeah.
button. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's all true. I don't think if you don't try something new every time, you're putting A to B together. The whole point, I think, all of us here is that we take risks and we try new things, and you pull out a bit of stock trade, and then you push something you've never tried before. For me, it's colour. I'm constantly trying new colour stuff. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. What's the joy of it? It's only there for 4 weeks.
But I think you can make nowadays much more finite work in a kind of painterly sense. I mean, you can create a production or look for a production which can exist in London, it can exist in New York, it can exist in other countries, and actually be recognisable as a piece of your work. And that changes things too. I think the fact that it can actually be reproduced, not quite like a painting, but it can be reproduced in different places and still be your work.
And that's also true of individuals. I mean, I can go and see a show and know, usually I'm 90% right who's lit it, because I recognise a style, a look, a fashion, use of structure, and so we are, in that respect, we're all very individual artists. And if it was more a craft, I think it would all be more similar.
I think it might be a nice time to own it.
Well, I was just going to say, is it something about product? Because our product is only relevant in the context of other people's input as well. So it only exists because it's a piece of theatre that also has direction, costume set, you know. So therefore you couldn't, well, Michael Howells is going to disagree with me, and I would disagree with me as well. You can't take any one of those things away and they exist entirely on their own. And is that why we say, we even ask the question, is it art?
Yeah, because those elements on their own are meaningless.
Yes.
It's all about context, isn't it? And the-
Yeah. But
Whereas if you made an installation that went into a gallery
Yeah.
and there's intent and context about that, which makes it art,
Yeah.
you can make decisions. And I wonder sometimes whether the question we have in all our collective minds is about whether or not we're artists is because there are so many people involved in
Exactly.
it, basically.
how do you
And
take
no
one away
thing
from
on
the
its
other?
own really stands on its own.
Yeah.
It's a collaboration, of course.
Yeah, but then you can apply that to anybody. So then you could say a director's not an artist because they're relying on everybody else.
But I'm not
So,
saying-
you know,
I'm-
it's all part of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is, I'm not saying we're not artists, but I'm
No,
saying
no,
that
well,
that's
I'm-
why there's the question.
Is that why
mark
we're
in
even
minds
asking the question?
Absolutely, but my point is that you wouldn't ask the same question of a director.
Some wouldn't.
No, but it's also interesting, you go to an exhibition like Tyrrell or somebody like that, and you see where he's just put a triangle of light in the corner of a room. You think, yeah, I did that 5 years ago in a show for something else. Do you know what I mean? So there's a kind of except that we or I would have done that within exactly that context, and he's taken it out of context and put it in a room, and then it's become fine art because of that.
Well,
I use the word
it's
casual
Jean
fine
Paul,
art.
isn't
I'm
it?
not saying the other isn't
Right.
art, but you know, there's a lot of that about. So it's kind of, I see where it comes from, and I think it also comes from the kind of history of things. You know, where pre-Second World War, probably just post-Second World War, it tended to be electricians doing it blue because the director wants it blue. You know, and doing it, and that's changed. I mean, that changed from the kind of early '60s days of Richard Pilbrow, etc., onwards. You know, that's where suddenly a new person came in. I mean, do you question that a video designer is an artist? I don't. And that's a relatively new person who's come to the scene. Do you question that a sound designer is an artist? Not anymore. No. Most of the sound designers I work with, I think of as being highly creative, contributing people in terms of the team. So it's like all of that. But I think the question goes way back, and that it just comes from something which perhaps one could have described as more of a craft way back. But I think we've grown up since then.
Anna, should we open mic more to the floor? Yes, please.
No, I think it's right. That it's the collaborative nature of a performance that we can easily acknowledge the whole thing as art. But it's that taking one element, we kind of shy away from calling it art because it's the whole thing.
Because that's why we work
and
with it.
and a painting or a sculpture or a video or something else is there has a kind of singularity about it that makes it very easy to say that that's the work of that artist, that is art. So it's just generally the kind of collaboration of like performance that
It's
makes it shy away from saying.
absolutely. I mean, it's a perception thing of other people, really. I mean, I did an installation in Guildford Cathedral a while back, and what I did there would be viewed as a kind of completely separate thing, like Lucy's. But I mean, what I really was doing was taking work that I've been doing for years and years and isolating it in that way. So I don't think that's any more art than what else I do. I think it's, for me, it's all part of the same process. But it might be regarded as being different. I think that's exactly what you're saying.
That's when you make an installation, the art form is light. But when we make theatre, the art form is theatre.
Yeah,
It's just art
absolutely.
medium is light.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it-
part
it's
of
a
the
thing
picture
to
book,
talk
doesn't
about.
it? Yeah, it doesn't negate it.
I think, and what's been touched on here already is the context of the work that we're doing. Lighting design and set design and costume design, it's all an applied art form. It's all in response to whether it's the choreography that's created from nothing or if it's the script that prescribes something. Whereas a piece of art, a lighting installation or a sculpture or a painting originates from, or generally originates from nothing. We could ask
From nothing.
Well,
I agree with that.
from
I don't agree with that either.
from it stands by itself. Let's put it that way.
But it's still a response to something.
It's still response to something, and we could ask ourselves: would we ask the same question of a painted portrait, or a landscape picture, or something completely different? Is the portrait picture not a piece of art if it's just responding to whoever's commissioned the portrait of themselves?
Well, you might as well start saying, is photography art? I mean, it's
Exactly.
a whole big thing there. But yeah, no, I mean, no, the answer is yes, of course, if it's interpreted.
I agree with what you said earlier about dance and the ability, I think has given life the greatest opportunity to be whatever it wants to be over the last 40 years. And in response to what you're saying, it's not always like that. Sometimes the first thing that might be made is the light.
Mm.
And then, so where's the art in that scenario? Because
I did a master's degree in set design, where my research project was creating a set design and then coming up with a story to then apply that to the set, rather than to make the set and lighting response to everything else. And where do you begin is a very difficult question, because when you have a script, when you have a costume design, when you have a well-known story, you can. It's so much more natural to a lighting designer to start on a project like that than it is to start with your own inspiration, with that nothing, which still isn't nothing, but let's call it nothing for the sake of argument. And I had to ask myself, what is the difference between art, as we see in galleries, and design as a concept? And I came to the conclusion that, if we go into semiotics, that design is always a solution to a problem. We need to cross the river. We need to design a bridge. We wouldn't need the bridge if there wasn't that problem. So lighting, in a sense, we need to see what's happening on stage. That's like part of the criteria. But obviously, how we show the action on stage, how we design it is kind of the artistic part of the design. And we can't look past the final product, like we were talking about. The show itself, that certainly is an art. The final product that we all create together, just like Peter mentioned, that the sculptor is reliant upon his whoever's doing his cast or casting his work. The same interdependency exists within the creation of the performance, and doesn't that make us all artists, even though a part of our work is to tick some boxes and fulfill some criteria?
Yeah. Kind of, yeah.
Might I play devil's advocate to that and to the concept of, we've got a panel of artists talking about their art. However, if we go back to a bit of philosophy, isn't art about how it is perceived and how it is judged? Who is to judge that the art they see not that they create, but that they see in a performance, whatever element it is, we're talking about lighting here, who is to judge whether it's right, it's good, is it art? Are we as artists actually only part of the story?
Lovely question.
I think somebody's on their way in. Well, there's good art, there's bad art, you know, and I think there's some truth in that. If you're going to actually,
Who's the
question
judge?
what is art gets asked in so many different areas, not just our area, and it's almost indefinable unless you simply make the separation that craft is something that you're kind of told to do, and art is something that you decide to do. And if you keep it as simple as that, then it kind of works. I don't think it's about the perception of people necessarily, because plenty of people looked at those bricks in the Tate and went, what a load of rubbish, you know, it's not art. And I don't think they have the right to make that decision, actually. They have a right to their opinion, and certainly, but I think they're wrong in terms of defining art in that kind of a way. You can say, I don't like it, or you can say, I think it's a bad piece of art. But you have to keep a much simpler definition if you want to say, what is art?
Okay, so there's a written definition. Art is in the decision, but not in the perception.
In my opinion, that would be largely true, yes. Look at
Would others
There's
agree
been a
with
thing
that?
on the radio this morning about the first found art movement, that he apparently found the first one. But by deciding that a teacup is a piece of art, he makes it a piece of art. Take it from there.
Just to carry on, I think my opinion is sort of not being a lighting designer, saying that being an artist and an engineer, and I work collaboratively, which is my practice. What surprises me listening to you all is that from my point of view, I see you all artists. And the problem I see, perhaps because of what you've been doing, is your own perception of having a label. Okay, and that, you know, if I step out, I have to do this. The fact that you're creative and what you do is transform, and light is a transforming medium like a palette, you know, it just really surprises me. Now, if you think in your own idea that I'm only an artist if I sell work, or I'm only create art if I'm in a certain place, that is your issue. It's not, you know, I think you have the creativity and talent to be whatever you want to be. You are, I think, you know, I'm just sort of seeing that. Now, some people possibly prefer to have boundaries. Being an artist, there's risk. It's personal. You're out there. You fail. You know, it's a big step when it's just you in your collaborative practice. But on the other hand, you have ownership, which is what you say. So I don't know if it does, but I think it's a personal opinion, depending on how you and who needs to validate it for you. Is it that you sell? Is it because you're somewhere? Is it because you know, that's also personal.
I think that's a very good point. You think
So I
the
think
lighting
the
design
sky's the
area
limit
has a
for
chip on
me,
its
but it's
shoulder?
you that needs to sorry?
Ultimately,
I
it
said,
doesn't
you
matter
think the
what we
lighting
call
design
ourselves.
has a chip on
Yeah,
its
that's
shoulder,
true.
in a way.
I don't know enough about them.
No,
but
I think
you might have
I
some
think it's a
because
valid
of
point.
how you've been treated.
No, I mean,
And I just think, you know, I'm appalled. Okay, my other thing I just noticed, but I loved all the stories, that some of the directors bring you so late on. I mean, for me, that's absolutely appalling, but maybe that's the best way, because directors can't communicate, or they get in the way, they don't know your stuff. I don't know. But again, fresh, that's a hierarchy. It was quite a surprise to me to hear.
it varies. It
Yeah,
varies.
it does vary. It does vary.
Can I just say, I sort of feel like there's from my personal point of view, I think you're absolutely right. I also feel that I think it's to do with a little bit what Joe said about leaving something behind, but also having a sense of ownership. When you leave a project and you feel like you have somehow managed to communicate what it was you were trying to do, and you managed to create that sensation that you get from a certain type of life, and you derive an immense amount of satisfaction from that, and you leave that project and you're satisfied, that's great. I never question myself then when I think I'm an artist. There are many times when I question myself as an artist. I have that sort of wavering of confidence because I haven't felt that I've managed to to successfully do that. And also, I think, but it also reference to what Pete said about the service industry. And from speaking for myself, I just happen to work with a number of directors who I suppose create what has become known as director's theatre, which is, I suppose, the type of director who has a broad control over all elements of the production. I'm thinking of people like Katie Mitchell and Simon Stone, who've created a very established world. And you enter the world and you have to learn the language and you have to leave part of yourself outdoors. And that sort of removal can be quite disempowering. You get to go to some pretty cool places and the money's better, basically, but there's a degree to which you sort of feel it's less satisfying somehow, and that's when you feel like maybe you're becoming more of a craft person, because you're not doing what you talked about, starting from something that's wholly of you and of yourself. And I do have the urge sometimes to just do something that is entirely mine without anyone else's influence, non-collaborative, to sort of really tap into that. So I feel like there's a sliding scale.
I think you have to bear in mind that we have a wide variety of experiences in terms of this. The collaborative process is not one single thing. It's a lot of experiences across a year, and it varies. And there are people who you work with who you're very familiar with, in which there are kind of great degrees of trust, and you don't have to have those conversations, a bit like Michael was talking about, this relationship with Russell. And those exist, and then there'll be people who you haven't worked with before, and you have to discover each other and create that trust.
That can be exciting, though, can't it?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But what I'm saying, it's not one simple thing.
Sometimes you're prepared to take more risk within those relationships, and sometimes you're not.
Sometimes you're empowered, actually.
Yeah.
That's the sometimes you're not.
Just to quickly answer you, James, on starting from yourself and do something on collaborative. What was really interesting was putting, because my piece of work became an opera, and putting a composer into the role of the responsive creative party was, he found it probably even more frustrating than for me to go and be the instigator. And it was really difficult for somebody who normally instigates pieces of work to then have to respond to something. It almost broke the project.
Yeah.
But I mean, just do one more thing, because I mean, I saw your work at the Young Vic a while back, and very much admired it. And it was very clear to me that and I've worked with Katie, so I know what you're talking about. It was very clear to me that your input was very recognisable in that sense.
Because it doesn't always feel that way, because sometimes it does feel like there's a little bit of dictation.
I can totally imagine. But that for me on that, I mean, that was very clear, and I thought it was beautiful work too. And I think I said, it was, you were fortunate in a way. I think you may have had other feelings, but to be working with a director who wasn't afraid of darkness, who wasn't afraid of working in the shadows that you created. So I mean, it can be tough.
It can.
But to me, that was very clear.
We've pushed through the sort of teething troubles in our relationship, and we're starting to talk properly about it, and it's really exciting now.
Yeah.
She's been made to articulate the things that she's always instinctively wanted, but never really been able to explain, which is great.
We have a question that's been waiting for
Yeah, I know. I mean, this actually feeds off of this kind of, because you alluded to this sort of a lighting signature in some way about being able to see, sensing who's done the lighting design. So I just want to say, for you, what is the right light? I know, I'm sorry, it's really hard, but for all of you, actually.
I don't think there is a right light.
But is there a light that you keep coming back to that has a part of that has that intrigue? Or
Do you mean one particular light?
I think I'm trying to get at the quality, because actually when you talk about an immaterial material, like what is this quality that might become that significant? I mean,
it's incredibly mercurial. It's one of those places where the light hits the actor in the role, in the costume, in the set at the right time, and there's something about it, something totally undefinable is right. And you sit there and go, wow, that's, especially when you're just at a 10:30 in the morning rehearsal, and then suddenly you get this, and you just sit there going, I'm in the best job in the world. It's absolutely phenomenal when that happens. But I have to say, you can never actually pin it down to it's because that works. But it just happens. And every so often, it's that chemistry set. You put the right things together, and suddenly there's a wonderful thing that happens. And when it does happen, it is earth-shattering. It can be.
For me, there's always that perfect moment where I remember that I'm in the right light. It's good that I'm a lighting designer, which is after you've done all that talking and all that being in rehearsals and all that technical kind of discussion and calculation about what you're going to put in that rig, and then you get to the focus. As much as I said I hate focusing, it's true, but the first time in that dark space that the first light of a focus comes up, it always makes me tingle, because I remember how beautiful light is and what we're just about to do. I'm just about to play with all this kind of beautiful thing. That's kind of possibly when I think, oh, this is the right light.
I mean, it's possible to say, I think, that the lighting process, certainly within theatre, is the last layer of creative work, in a sense that it's the melding of performance and surface design. And it's when you know that you've brought those two things together, when you've illustrated the performance, but also done interesting work in terms of the canvas or the set or what's around it, that's when you kind of know. But in terms of the stylistic thing, I think that is recognisable in other ways. You can recognise the sculptural quality of Michael's work. You know, you can recognise people's use of colour in other areas, and you do carry those things with you. I mean, you carry, I would say, I carry certainly a palette with me, a familiar palette. Doesn't mean I might not step out of it at certain times, but I would always be quite pleased if somebody recognised my work in the sense that you might go, oh, that's a Hodgkin, that's a this, that, or the other. You know, you kind of want that. So you do carry those things as well. You carry a way of shaping things with you. When you say what's the right light is when all those things combine together and work. But there is a stylistic thing within that which I think is important, and that's something which is, again, grown over the last few decades. The notion that people have individual styles in that kind of a way.
I'd like to say that I'd take all three of those answers.
Who them might say
No. Because they're all emotions that we have while we're doing that work. And whenever you get those emotions, then you know you're on the right light. And just to add my side to that would be, when you know that a whole audience has grasped and drawn into a production, whether it be a single light or a whole stage, drawing the whole of the people you're sitting with into that space, and the emotion, whether it's whatever that emotion is being drawn out because we are pulling that audience's eye to that position. To me, that's when it's magical, when everybody else in that space is being led by our craft.
I think that maybe part of it is actually nothing to do with the light itself, but it's about being the right moment. Because this is all about live performance, and I think that sometimes with lighting design, what we're doing when we're part of this team creating theatre is that we're creating moments, and so that light at that moment isn't the right light, but at that moment, precisely that moment, and it might take an hour to find exactly about the timing of it. That's a part of what makes it right or not, I think.
I think this might be the right moment for us to move the conversation towards the bubbly that's been prepared for us.
Yes, I think it is. Thank you all, very much fascinating. One of the things about this project, which was fantastic for me, was listening to all of these people for hours on end. because they just are so interesting. Lighting designers, I always knew lighting designers were, you know, in order to be good, you had to know so much, you had to be engaged with society, and it was really interesting conversations all the way through. I hope this afternoon has been really interesting conversations. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's taken part.